Hey Trekkies, Dan Gunther here, finally sitting down to share my thoughts about Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond's release date was already almost 2 full weeks ago, releasing on July 22nd to wide audiences. I already did do a quick video about our brash reflections immediately following the film. Click here to check that out. I interview a few of my friends and other people associated with this channel and talk about what we liked immediately after seeing the film. However, before we get too far from the release date, I wanted to share some more specific feelings of mine about the film. First part of this review will be spoiler free, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, go ahead, stick around. I will stick a warning when I start getting into spoilers, which will be the back half of the video. I really enjoyed this film. Unlike a lot of Star Trek fans out there, I did also enjoy the previous two films. The way I usually put it to people who ask is the previous two Star Trek movies had a lot of the things that I like about Star Trek, just not the things that I like the most about Star Trek. So if you want to get into the cliche type stuff, Gene Roddenberry's positive vision of the future, striving to be better, that sort of thing. While those films did have a little bit of that, they definitely didn't show that to the extent that you see in a lot of other Star Trek. Now, I don't want this to get into all old Star Trek is great and all new Star Trek sucks, because that's just simply not the case. There has been a lot of bad Star Trek in the past, and while these movies may not showcase what everyone loves about Star Trek, it does showcase a lot of what's good about Star Trek. With regards to Star Trek Beyond, I do have to say that of the three JJ verse / we're calling it the Kelvin Timeline now movies, this one feels the most like Star Trek to me. It has a kind of ineffable quality that reminds me of the original series. In the two previous films, it sometimes didn't feel so much that the characters were actually inhabiting the roles, but merely play acting as Uhura, Bones, Spock, Kirk, Chekhov, etc. Now, that's not to criticize the abilities of these actors. They are all really great performers who do an amazing job. Carl Urban as Bones, for example, I think is fantastic. He's absolutely magnificent in that role. However, the previous two films really felt like they were still living in the shadows of the original roles. Whereas this one, I really feel like the actors were able to make the characters their own. In fact, that's a big part of the storyline for both Kirk and Spock, are kind of how they come to grow into these characters and how they become the characters that we know and love. Another aspect that I felt may have been missing in the previous two films that really comes into play here is kind of a sense of wonder and discovery. This one, they're out on the frontier. They're pushing the boundaries of explored space. When we're introduced to Yorktown Base, for example, there are these sweeping shots of the station. And I really felt like there's that sense of wonder back in Star Trek that's kind of been missing. I think Simon Pegg and Doug Young and Justin Lin, the director, did just an amazing job bringing that idea and these places to life. The character work is fantastic, both with the crew that we've come to know, as well as the new characters, most especially Sofia Boutella as Jayla. I think I was expecting a lot of her physical presence to be a big part of this movie, but it's not just that. She really does a great job communicating the emotional core of this character. And there are a couple scenes where her performance really does communicate effectively what kind of person this is and what she's gone through to get where she is now. In the history of Star Trek, the Enterprise has always been as much of a character as any of the crew. You get the crew personifying her, especially Captain Kirk, almost having a bit of a love affair with his ship. That idea has never really come across in the previous two films. The Enterprise was just kind of the ship that they had, and Kirk was very happy to be commanding her, but it was more the prestige of commanding the Federation's flagship. Whereas in this film, kind of ironically, it's almost the first time that this Enterprise feels like a character and is very important to the crew as a part of the team. Now, this film is far from perfect. There are a few things that I didn't like so much. For one thing, the motivation of the villain, Crawl, I think there are some interesting ideas there. And again, we'll get into those on the spoiler side of things, but it wasn't enough. And also, there were a few moments that strained credibility just enough to kind of take me out of the movie. Some really amazing action set pieces, but a couple of times where it just, man, it was hard to kind of go with the movie when something completely ridiculous is happening on screen. Okay, here's the spoiler part of the video. If you haven't watched Star Trek Beyond yet, you might want to click off, wait until you've seen the film. I am going to get into some spoilers here. So some of the things I absolutely loved were a lot of the little references to previous Star Trek episodes and just little Easter eggs for the fan to find. And one thing I'd really like to do once the Blu-ray comes out is do a really close analysis and a list of every little Easter egg and reference in the film, because there are a ton references to the Stargazer at the beginning. Just in even little things like Kirk saying that he ripped his shirt again, big green glowing space hands, that kind of thing. I really loved how they paid tribute to the memory of Leonard Nimoy in this film, both within the narrative of the film, with Ambassador Spock having passed away and the effect that that has on the young Spock and how he hopes to continue on. The scene he has with McCoy is incredibly touching, where he says that he wishes to live as the elder Spock did. And again, it really feeds into that idea of these characters really coming into their own. I really started to appreciate what these actors bring to that role outside of what we've seen before. The Franklin? Really great aspect of the film. I thought it was really cool, a lot of the ties to the television series Enterprise that they put in there. There's references to the Makos, there's references to fighting the Xindi, phase cannons and spatial torpedoes and that sort of thing. You know, just little things that really show that the people behind this film are Star Trek fans and know their stuff. Towards the end, when Zachary Quinto's Spock is opening Ambassador Spock's personal effects, and in it is a case with a photograph inside, and the photograph is the original crew, played by Shatner, Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Nichelle Nichols, George Takei, and Walter Koenig. And it's such an amazing, touching moment that I was not expecting in the slightest, and it was really special. It was a really great moment. And I guess technically they did in fact find a way to get William Shatner in the movie. So there you go. He's in two-dimensional photograph form, but he's there. So Krull's motivations. Now, I feel like there was the opportunity for some very interesting stuff with this character. It turns out that he was formerly a Mako in the Earth's military. And then when the Federation was formed, Mako was disbanded and folded into Starfleet, and he was given command of the USS Franklin. Now he finds himself marooned on this planet and unable to escape. And after finding technology that allows him to live an extraordinarily long life, he develops a huge hatred of the Federation and wants to destroy them or cripple them. His idea that the Federation and the values that it espouses are in fact weaknesses, and it's really war and struggle that creates strength. The seeds of a very, very interesting idea there, but again, it just doesn't quite dig deep enough into it to make me really buy his motivations. I feel like there was just enough there to be slightly interesting, but it just doesn't quite get there. At its heart, Star Trek Beyond is a movie about characters, which is really great because I feel like Star Trek Into Darkness was a movie about plot at the expense of characters. This one you could almost see as really exploring the characters and their relationships at the expense of plot. The plot here is a little bit thin. So some set pieces that I had some problems with. I feel like when they're fighting in the remains of the crashed saucer section of the Enterprise, and they fire the thrusters and it flips over and they're sliding down the front of the saucer section having a phaser battle. No, I'm sorry. There's no way they would have survived that. That was one part where I kind of had to go, okay, this is a little bit too much. I feel like a lot of Star Trek fans are going to have a little bit of trouble when they use the Beastie Boys sabotage to destroy the swarm ships. Yeah, it's a little bit over the top. It's a little bit um, hard to believe. But this is one of those moments that I feel like the movie has been good enough up to that point that it buys that moment. Like, it kind of cashes in a little bit of how good it was to the point where I, as a viewer, can go, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. A lot of fans, I feel like, aren't going to see it that way, but I thought that was really great. And then when Yorktown Station starts broadcasting it as well, and it's almost like there's just this wave of sound destroying the ships in time to the music, of course, really makes for a fun moment, I think. And of course, McCoy's line, is that classical music? And Spock, yes, Doctor, I believe it is. You know, just great stuff. Well, what did you think of Star Trek Beyond? Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were there parts that were just too over the top for you? Let us know in the comments what you thought. Please check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Links are in the description. My name is Dan Gunther. You can find me online on my website, treklit.com, where I review Star Trek novels, both old and new, and on the Literary Treks podcast that I do with Matthew Rushing and Bruce Gibson, in which we talk about books and comics from the Star Trek universe. Yeah, I bought it. It's the Franklin. It's pretty cool.